Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the unfortunate rise in terrorism as far as Pakistan is concerned. Our preparedness, our resolve of course is strong. We've also seen our security forces as far as our police is concerned, as far as the government is concerned. The crackdown on terrorism overall. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about our policies as far as our vis-a-vis other countries, our preparedness as far as our borders are concerned. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me ABM retired Marshal Ijaz Malik. Thank you for being with us. We also have with us Gohar Mehsud, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us. And we have with us Yasir Janjua, who is a security analyst. Thank you for being with us today. Marshal Saab, overall, as far as the situation is concerned, we've seen, of course, the way that we've seen the rise in the spate of terrorism is particularly concerning. We've seen what happened in Peshawar. We've seen, unfortunately, other attacks that have followed after that. How do you look at the overall situation at this time?
Yes, definitely it is a very alarming situation, because after successful conduct of Operation Zarb-e-Azb in Pakistan and some parts of National Action Plan which were implemented then by the political as well as the military resources, we had seen that either they were taken out physically or they opted out to take refuge across the border towards the Afghanistan side. And of course, there were some sleeper cells which went into that hibernation well within Pakistani soil. But now with change environment in the region, there are I think 3 factors which has enabled them to show their presence and show their physical outreach to cause certain attacks in Pakistan, because it really mattered for them. After a prolonged hibernation, they had to show their relevance, so they had to opt for, and it was expected that with the change scenario in the region, there would be a rise, but the magnitude of this rise was probably not imagined at that time. And the 3 factors which have, in my opinion, have facilitated them. One is the new government in Afghanistan, which if not supportive, at least they are providing them a favorable environment to operate or to launch from their soil. And despite our protest, our calls on them and trying to engage them through dialogue, there hasn't been any positive response from that side. The second thing which has happened is the political instability in Pakistan, where the law enforcement agencies are obviously they are committed in other security arrangements within the country, so that gives them a window to operate. And thirdly, the outside players who want to sabotage CPAC, they are a good instrument to further their goals in Pakistan.
Right, let me go to Gohar Saab. Gohar Saab, what about our role, of course, the National Action Plan and the work that we've done already on it. What are some of the areas you feel that, we need to work on at this time and where we're lacking particularly?
Thank you. I think Mr. Ijaz has explained very well, but what I think we are having issue with the lack of implementations of the policies is we have established and made a national action plan, but it was not implemented as it should be implemented. So this was the only a program regarding terrorism that was the whole nation was expecting very much from it, but we couldn't implement it. The second thing is many times we don't have long-term policies in the national interest. Every government comes and they had their own policies. They are not carrying the previous policies. especially in the perspective of national interest or nationwide interests. So these are the very, I would say, unlucky things, especially when the government change, the establishment and the political government, many times they get rifts in between their relations. So the policies didn't come on the appropriate place where we must see the policies, but they are not having same thinking on the policies. So I believe that the main thing, the main problem is not the unification of the government and institutions and the national policies, and we don't have long-term policies which we could amplify.
Okay,
and
let me come back to
get
you.
results.
Yasir Saab, can you hear me?
If you can hear me as well.
Ji, Yasir Saab, overall, you know, the continuation of policies as far as, you know, with respect to increase in terrorism and, you know, as far as our security situation is concerned, do you think that's also has been a problematic area for us, as Gohar Mehsud Saab is saying?
There is always a connection between the government policies and the increase or decrease in terrorism. So that goes without saying. However, I don't particularly agree to one point Mr. Gohar is alluding to, that the National Action Plan was not fully implemented. I think there was no lack of commitment from the armed forces, and we have seen some very successful operations from the armed forces, and that resulted in successes in the tribal areas of Pakistan. However, what we must keep in mind that this rise in terrorism or return to terrorism is post November 2022, when until November 2022 there was a temporary ceasefire agreement or ceasefire arrangement between Pakistan and Taliban, because they were back for diplomacy or discussions going on, and when those broke down, Taliban, the TTP picked up the weapons again, and their demands. What were their demands that they've been pressing that the government of Pakistan would never probably agree to? One, they would want stricter Sharia law in Pakistan. Two, they wanted their their fighters, their militants, to be released. Whosoever were in the custody in Pakistani jails to be released. And three, they wanted the FATA reforms to be reversed, and FATA which was merged into KPK, to be returned back to its status, which used to be a federal territory. Now, any sane government in its right mind would not accept these demands at all. And these conditionalities from a terrorist group or a splinter group, no government would accept. So I think this is one of the reasons, apart from any other reason, that the Taliban have again started flexing their muscles. But in addition to this or these reasons, one of the major reasons is the political and the economic instability in Pakistan as of now. So the thing is that also causes people to think that because there is no cohesion in the government, or there is no commitment perceived by them. I'm not saying whether there is or there's not. It's just how the terrorists perceive. So they think this is the right time to attack because the government is too worried about other things or too busy in other things, and they are not concentrating on other things. However, what they don't understand, that there is a faction of the government which has got the responsibility to tackle these things, that is armed forces, and they will continue doing their job. And these things, these troughs and treads, they keep happening, you know. It is not the first time that the terrorism went down and then came back again. What we are trying to do here...
Let me come back to you on that note. Ji, Air Marshal Saab, overall, Ijaz Saab, there is, you know, would you agree with what Yasir Saab is saying? Of course, economic instability or political instability, you know, that may be whatever the perception that may you know, send out. He's of course right that, you know, as far as armed forces are concerned, as far as, you know, their role is concerned, as far as our security forces are concerned, they're fully cognizant of the situation, and there are, you know, constant vigilance is there as far as, but in terms of our response to these attacks, in terms of our own, the way that we have to guard ourselves against this kind of terrorism. Do you think that we are, taking the necessary action in those areas?
Yes, I think we are taking action, but such kind of threats cannot be totally eliminated because they have no timelines defined. So they can go into sleeping mode, they can go into hibernation, they can pick up the targets of their own choice. Mostly their idea is not to destroy a particular target. Their idea is to get into limelight, so they are looking for a soft target or a target which gives them media coverage, both in the local or regional media and international media. So such kind of targets, they cannot be they are spread all over the country, so they cannot be protected with a foolproof mechanism. They can only be stopped at the crossing points. They can be stopped through.
But in terms of particularly our border, with Afghanistan, it's to tackle that. Let me go to Gohar Sahab on this. Gohar Sahab, to tackle the issues that may stem from there, and our border security, we faced issues there. Isn't that true?
Yeah, exactly. We have this border, we have sealed the border, and we have seen this on the media as well. And again, this question raised that how they can come into Pakistan. So here is the thing that definitely sometimes if we have some issues with ourselves, we must keep themselves in front of us to discuss and to resolve it. So here, if like Mr. Yasir was saying that the operations were successful, yes, indeed they were successful, but I would say there were too many things with these operations. The people were displaced, the area got empty. Then how they came back into the tribal areas once again. Now what we have seen on the border areas, the Taliban are entering into the tribal areas. So the question is, what were the things that make all these situations loose for the Taliban? Why we are not taking actions on these basis to clarify that these were the elements, these were the things that involved to bring the Taliban once again into the tribal areas. And definitely right now we have very bad situation, very bad security situation on the border areas in the tribal region, is even in Balochistan side. So for these purposes, as I said earlier, that the Pakistan need a very uniform policy, and the policy not for like one-term government, but it must be for long terms, because now if we are taking actions against the Taliban, or the current government is trying to get into negotiation with them, and again if another government is coming, they will go for military operations.
But isn't it true that overall, let me go to Yasir Sahab on this. Yasir Sahab, isn't it true that overall, as far as our policies are concerned, Yasir Sahab, can you hear me? Overall, our policies as far as security is concerned, our armed forces are concerned, isn't it true that regardless of the change in governance, they remain essentially the same?
See, the policy to tackle the militants, for example, the National Action Plan, this has been followed on by the successive governments. The National Action Plan was first adopted by the PMLN government in 2014 after the APS attacks. And then even in the PTI government, that was the case. This was being followed, and the armed forces and the civilian government were on board on the National Action Plan. So the policies do not change, and Pakistan's policy is consistent about the terrorism. There is no change in that. However, what I want to say is, in the light of this discussion, this is after 2017, since 2017 and until 2022, there was a time of relative peace. So all these 5 years, And there were two governments in these 5 years. In 2017 and 18, there was a different government, and 2018 onwards till 2022, early 22, there was another government. So the two different governments, but there was no terrorism or less of incidents. What we are seeing now, spike of those incidents, what we are seeing now. There are, as the reasons I've explained. In addition to those, as Gaur was asking, it is also known that it's just not that why the Taliban are now regrouping in Pakistani areas. They're actually, and there is evidence in Pakistani government now. A few weeks ago, the defense minister and the DGISI went to the Afghans, and now we are waiting for another Afghan delegation to come to Pakistan. We've given them the dossiers, we have given them the evidence that the Afghan soil is being used by the Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan splinter factions who are hiding inside Afghanistan, or Afghan warlords have provided them sanctuaries. So that is one reason. Although we can't absolve ourselves of the responsibility that if they are coming from there, then we are not responsible. There has to be something done on our side as well. However, these are the things. It's just not that Pakistani armed forces are not capable to handle what is going on inside FATA areas or erstwhile FATA areas. They're trying and they're doing, but one has to remember these low intensity conflicts, these insurgency operations, they are not like a conventional war where you go and you face an enemy which is right in front of you and you get up from the FUP and you attack and then whatever you do. Here, you don't know who's the enemy because the enemy is just walking. For example, in the case of the Peshawar police lines attack, or even in the Karachi police attack, so the guy is just, in one case, he walked in the police uniform. How do you differentiate between an enemy and a friendly foe?
That's where the challenges are. Yasir Saab, can you please sit a little closer to the camera, because it's I think we're having a problem with the voice quality there. But how do we deal with those issues then? You know, like you are saying that of course, you know, people who are wearing police attire, you know, we're talking about suicide bombing, all of those things, these are challenges that are extreme.
These are you talking to me or to the other panelists?
I'm talking to you.
Well, these are the real challenges. As I said, low intensity conflict is not easy to handle. Yet, Pakistan armed forces are doing a great job, and they've given sacrifices. Yet they are doing what needs to be done. We start panicking in terms of thinking, oh, there is 28% spike in terrorism in 2022, which is a huge amount of increase compared to the yesteryears. However, as I said, and I'm going to say it again, it has multiple factors associated to it. The armed forces alone will not be able to get this. When the police and the law enforcement agencies and the civilian administration and the government are busy in other things, the terrorists, they will take advantage of that situation. So, I mean, there is a reason behind this madness which is happening at this time, when all of a sudden Pakistan is in a financial turmoil and a political turmoil. And then
but it's happened before. It's happened before, and we've had, you know, we've been able to deal with it effectively. So, of course, you know, as far as our preparedness is concerned, let me come back to you. Ijaz Saab, as far as our own preparedness is concerned, our, you know, security agencies are concerned, of course, like again, what Yasir Saab is saying, this kind of low intensity conflict that he's talking about is difficult. The methods used are difficult to combat. It's not easy. But how, as far as our national action plan is concerned, I think that really we need to go back to areas or you know, which points that have been left out. Isn't that true? That's the root of it, right?
In fact, most of the point in the action, national action plan, and which was again modified in the last government time, there hasn't been any substantial progress on that. While the points which are pertaining to the law enforcement agencies, particularly the Pakistan Armed Forces, those were implemented right after it was conceived. But the points like madrasa reforms and de-radicalization and creating consensus about this menace, those are long-term points which needs to be pursued with you know, a lot of vigor over strategic depth. But unfortunately, that hasn't been done. And secondly, the armed forces, as Janjua Sahab had mentioned, they are very much capable to take them on the borders or in the areas, troubled areas. But in the urban settled areas, the dynamics are different. There is no attack which originates in a ready to be employed form from anywhere into Pakistan. You know, there is a whole sequence of events. Initially, there are some people, they come here, they select the target, they do the reconnaissance, then they hire or acquire some residence or a place where they can get together, they can assemble their IEDs or their motorcycle or vehicle borne explosive laden vehicles. So this all can be prevented in case our police, the local police, is vigilant, because they have.
You think there's a lapse there? You feel that there is a lapse there?
There is definitely a lapse there, because in our the conventional policing system, police would know the entire length of their police station or the thana area of responsibility. They would have their informants, they would have their planted people, they would have their community surveillance, and any newcomer coming into the area would be reported. Any suspicious activity vis-a-vis timings or gatherings, that would be picked up by their trained tentacles, and it would be reported. Now, unfortunately, I am not blaming any government, but over the period of time, our population has increased, urban centers have expanded to any limits. We do not have that sufficient police strength, one, and the strength which is available over the decades, that is mostly diverted towards the political objectives or protocols. That is why we see a lot of street crimes in Pakistan, because we do not have a reasonable or internationally acceptable ratio of policing versus the population centers. So we really have to focus on that, provide resources, because it is in our own interest. There shouldn't be any doubt that we have to fight. We should get out of that narrative that it has been a result of fighting somebody else's war in Pakistan. There are enemies, and we have to expand our resources and develop our capacity.
But isn't it true? Let me go to Gohar Sahab, but we did fight somebody else's war. Isn't that true? Ijaz Sahab is saying that that narrative is not necessarily the way forward.
Well, I'll just start from his words that we don't have a good the police system, like the conventional police system. No doubt, yes, because of such kind of systems and things, we have seen the street crimes and all these things. Similarly, many times when we are talking about terrorism and all these things, we are seeing the tribal areas and FATA in front of us. So in those areas, if we can see and we can feel, observe street crimes because of the policing system here in the
so you're saying that like Ijaz Sahab is saying, there's a lapse as far as our security forces are concerned, and we need to perhaps our police. But then again, police reform is something that has been talked about. It's also been on the agenda on the National Action Plan, isn't
exactly.
that
This is what I was mean, because National Action Plan was not only to take operations and actions in the tribal areas. It has a very vast subjects. Similarly, the police system need to be scientifically established, re-established. And again, I would go to the tribal areas. There are too many injustices in political system, in infrastructure, development, justice in society, in many things. We don't have institutions kind of, we just do have our security forces there, but the other institutions we don't have on that scale. So the people, they don't have other options. The terrorism or this kind of activities are the main source of income for many people in those areas, because we don't have any other things. So, beside re-establishing police system, we need to work on the tribal areas, not only announcement or inauguration are things we need to do work on the ground and get the results positively.
Let me go to Yasir Saab. Yasir Saab, going back to the National Action Plan, let's talk about the areas which, you know, again, like Gohar Saab is saying, it's an all-encompassing document that actually has, you know, it's not by no means small, and it just doesn't involve, you know, the action against terrorists per se, but also a lot of other measures, like for example, police reform was part of it, madrasa reform, all of those things, and you know, those areas unfortunately are untapped still.
Mahrukh, I agree to the point that police reforms do need to take place. The National Action Plan or anything like that, you can write volumes and volumes, but if they're not implemented, they'll just be pieces of paper sitting in on somebody's desk, you know. However, why are we talking about police reforms? I'm sorry, I have to say this very bluntly. What happened in Peshawar did not need any police reforms to check what happened in the mosque in Peshawar in police lines. Somebody just had to.
Ji. Sorry, I can't hear. Ji, I can't hear you. Ji, Ijaz Saab, we were interrupted with Yasir Saab. There's a problem with audio, but he's saying that it doesn't necessarily, whatever happened in Peshawar, he was saying, has little to do with the national action, structural, you know, reforms as far as police are concerned.
Yes, I would agree with him. That is mostly the execution of the assigned duties, the SOPs not being followed, the focus of self-defense, and it would be, you know, it gives very negative message that if the law enforcement or the security agencies, they haven't been able to protect their own premises or their own infrastructure, how are they going to affect the communities? So, you know, it creates a kind of demoralization effect in the entire community. So, for that we just need to make sure that whatever force and whatever reserve forces we have and whatever human as well as equipment resources we have, that should be optimally utilized. And we should not sit back. The war is not over, and such low intensity conflicts, they are, you know, they would keep simmering, and there we'll see a lot of spikes in the trends and in the magnitudes. So we have to get away with the complacency and optimally utilize whatever resources we have. And of course, on the sidelines, we do have to appreciate and develop a consensus and make sure that the resources are available to restructure and improve wherever the improvements are required within the system, whether it is the law enforcement or the handshake of various intelligence agencies, sharing of information. There are a lot of gray areas which such enemies can take advantage of.
At this time, Gohar Saab, of course, stability, political stability, you know, as far as economic stability is concerned, certainly those areas we are finding at this time there are challenges in that quarter. Janjua Saab is saying that, you know, that is when you're perceived more vulnerable, of course, when you're facing those challenges. But in your opinion, you know, that perception being whatever it is, long-term policies being, you know, which have to be followed. But primarily when we talk about armed forces, of course, there's a consistency there as far as our policies are there. Isn't that true?
Yeah, maybe it would be true, but if again we are talking about security forces, security forces must not mean only the Rangers or the armed forces. We have a Khesadar force, Mr. Malik would know very well. We have levies force in the tribal areas, especially after the merge of the FATA into the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. These forces are not capable, even a single person. I'm not talking about terrorism because they are not equipped, they are not trained. They are the traditional forces, and they are in thousands, not like in hundreds. So when you are putting such force to eliminate or to counter the terrorists who are internationally mobilized, I think we have no right to ask the question that we cannot get the results. So what we need is that look into our levies forces, Hasadar forces, because they are our forces. They are deployed in the areas. So this is one of also the major reasons, because the local forces are not prepared, not equipped, not trained to fight against terrorism. And again, yes, we cannot make this a debate that, oh yeah, we need a long-term policy, so we shall wait for this and this and this. But yes, what we are doing, we must do it with the consensus and sincerity. Here we are observing many people, especially on the topic of terrorism, currently many political parties and political leadership, they are playing their interests, they are playing their political gains on the topic of terrorism. So the whole political parties and security forces, they must come on one point agenda, not on the game of politics. Like recently, different political parties have their own perspective. But they must come on one point. Okay, I might have some differences in some things, and you must have some differences, but it doesn't mean that we neglect the whole subject and allow the subject to do what they want. We can't do anything, and this is what happening. And similarly, the same thing had a main source for our economic instability. This is why we are observing that many international communities are pointing us that you are not capable of economic, you are not capable to counter terrorism and things. So we are losing our economic stability and all these things, and can't do anything for the common people. Maybe the top, they will get what they want and what they need, but the common people are going down and down because of the leadership.
Let me go to Yasir Saab. Yasir Saab, we talk about, of course, Gohar Saab is saying that, but the point is, we can't lay all the blame on the leadership's door. When we talk about the policies overall, we saw what happened with the change from in across the border. We've seen there are challenges that have come from there also, particularly with the change that we've seen in Afghanistan. So for us to become cognizant and to deal with those challenges, it's particularly been difficult, and we've also tried to give of course the condition in Afghanistan itself, with the women and the children, their own economic conditions, all of those things weigh in. Would you agree?
They do weigh in. Obviously, there are forces and factors pushing in the entire spectrum. Now, there's no one single point which is causing all this spike in terrorism. However, you are implying that we can't blame the leadership. Unfortunately, it's the political leadership which has to take the blame all the time, forever. Whatever is going wrong, the leadership has to go and take the blame. If it goes well, the leadership takes the credit. That's how the politics works. Now, allow me to say, PSL match is going on in Rawalpindi, There is 5,000 police force protecting it. When a minister gets out of his office, there is a large contingent of police protecting him. Similarly, the judges. And when the ex-prime minister comes out on the road for a procession, the entire focus of the police forces goes towards making sure there is no incident on that procession. And that is happening for the last 10 months, every other day, So, police is stretched, but somebody, to be honest, deploying 5,000 people for a PSL match at the cost of country security, at the cost of lives of people.
But Yasir Saab, of course, we don't want any unsavory incident happening there. We have to secure ourselves against anything that can happen in any crowd. And of course, to sabotage an event like that, of course, considerations. You're right. Different considerations will play a different role. But of course, we have to give the government that leeway.
I'll just give you one scenario and a solution, not a solution right here, but just to give you an example, because this is what I do for a living. I advise people, I advise countries on and top organizations. Why couldn't somebody, the cost of deploying 5,000 people for X number of days, multiplied by, I mean, forget about that. Why can't they build a hotel next to the stadium? And the team stay next to the hotel, the stadium, and they just walk out of their room and go into the stadium. So that the entire route where the teams have to go in and out of their hotels into the stadium have to be protected. And the entire nation, the entire city, the Twin Cities are having miserable time. So these are the things that you can do, practical steps you can do, and then let the police do what it's supposed to do. So this is PSL is one example. In case of political processions, this should be made sure as part of national action plan, let's say, that police will not be involved or be deployed on doing these things. And in order to do that, all the political parties must come on board and agree that they're not going to take out processions like this and make life miserable for everybody. They'll go into let's say, into a stadium, into a park, and they will stay there and they will not go out, so that there has to be less law enforcement involvement on
But
doing
Yasir
these
Sahab,
things.
what would you do then when you have an opposition with jail bharo tahreeks and you have, you know, a former prime minister moving with hundreds and thousands of people?
All the politics, I'm not particularly, I mean, I have myself said that this party is doing this, and then the others, when they get their chance, they do it. So it's across the political divide, it's happening. That's
Right,
why I
right.
said,
Of course.
all
You're
these
saying that,
political
of course,
parties
I agree with you. You're saying that leadership needs to take responsibility for what's happening in the
Yes.
country. They need to take responsibility for our security situation, for the challenges that we are facing on numerous levels. I think there have been times we've been talking about this. Ji, Ijaz Sahab, do you agree? Of course, you know, there has to be across the board, you know, the leadership, whether the former leadership or not. The point is they have to own the fact that we are at this time dealing with challenges, and therefore they have to conduct themselves in a manner that they don't add to them.
Exactly. I think we need to develop a consensus regarding certain high priority issues of national security, like our policy and handling of Kashmir, Indian affairs of the foreign policy, Afghan part of the foreign policy, and even our relationship with the superpowers. So we should develop a consensus on that, and then we should not try to make use of anybody's statement or narrative for our political gains. Unfortunately, as Gohar Sahib had mentioned, we try to get mileage over somebody's statement or somebody's just affiliation with certain school of thought and try to take a political mileage out of it. If we just decide once for all how are we going to handle as a state, as a responsible state, as a country, as a nation, and then we depoliticize those issues as far as the domestic politics are concerned. You see, like in most of the developed democracies, their election campaign, their domestic politics is run on the domestic issues. And they very consistently pursue their foreign policy and global issues. Whether there are Democrats or there are Republicans in the White House, you would always see how they are handling the world.
I do believe that our political leadership is not 100% free to make the policies. As we have seen the previous peace talks with TTP, the federal government was saying that we have no idea about this, but literally they make a committee for that and start the peace talks and negotiations.
But overall, of course, you know, there has to be, like, I think I agree with what Ijaz Sahab is saying, there has to be a consensus on these important issues, and across the board consensus.
Exactly. So till they don't have a consensus on that topic, only just to blame the political leadership, for me it would be not a good
Of course,
stance.
but and across the board, in any case, across the board consensus is the order of the day. When one talks about economy, when one talks about security, these are issues that really need across the board consensus overall. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Yasir Sahab, your comments, unfortunately we're running out of time, but anything you'd like to add?
I think that goes without saying. Consensus is the key to evolving a unified strategy, and this is what we need to do and put behind all the differences. Now, what we are seeing here is, but the reality is that all the political parties are not even, for example, ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan is not willing to sit on the table with these parties and discuss the situation. So what do we do here?
Right.
However, it is the armed forces, the law enforcement agencies are just the implementers. They are not the policy makers. So if somebody thinks that the policy is being made by them, no, they are implementing. Or even if they are going in talks with Taliban, they are doing it on behalf of the government. They are going as ambassadors. So the policy is still of the government. They are just
Right.
implementing it. We have to add political consensus is important. The military and the law enforcement will be there to implement it.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Air Vice Marshal Ijaz Malik Saab, thank you for joining us. Gohar Mehsud Saab, thank you for being with us. Yasir Janjua Saab, thank you for joining us today. Like I said earlier also, the discussion overall, of course, considering our economic situation, considering our security situation, consensus across the board is the order of the day, it's the way forward, and political interest has to be second to national interest at this time. Let's hope that we can see that again and again. You know, it's about sitting together and talking about these issues that matter as far as the country is concerned. And true leadership is when you can rise above your own political interest and look at what the country has to gain and sit together and talk about the issues that really need an input from all stakeholders. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.